Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm proud that I've had the opportunity to serve here going on my 8th term. This is my 16th year in the House of Representatives, but I have never risen to this podium on a matter of personal privilege. This is the first time I've ever done this, and so if I don't do it well, bear with me, because it is not easy, and I know why we have so few of them. I can remember when Mr. Craddock gave one years ago. I wanted to speak to you members for just a couple of minutes and say, maybe a little bit more than a couple, but to say that not everything we do in this chamber as individuals we do for politics. Not everything we do and every decision that we make is based on the political calculation. And so, you all know, some of us have been asking questions in the back mic these last days, and will continue to today until midnight. And the reason I can only speak for myself, but the reason I've done that is because I am very, very concerned and strongly opposed to something that is very fundamental and something that is very, very important to me, and I believe to millions of people in this state and in this country, and that is the right to vote. I don't have a lot of notes. I wrote 3 things here. These are my notes. The first one is Sonia Sotomayor. The second one is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the third one is Henry B. Gonzalez. And I'll speak about that in a second. But the bill that is commonly referred to as the voter ID bill, which I believe is a voter suppression bill, and I believe that all the evidence out there points to the fact that were we to pass that legislation, in fact, it would suppress voters in this state, people who have a right to vote, but people who would be, unfortunately, I think, turned away from the polls. And I remember the other day when Dr. Allen passed her constitutional amendment to ratify the constitutional amendment that prohibited the poll tax. It took us a long time to get there, a long time to get here. But I'm so happy that I was part of this legislature when we did that, and when the Senate did that a couple of days ago. But it has to mean something. And she sent around a letter, you may have gotten it or seen it, had a copy of a poll tax that Jimmy Don Aycock's grandmother, I believe, had paid. And it was interesting to look at that. But in my office, I have not copies, but 2 original poll taxes. And I display that in my office to remind myself. This wasn't paid by my grandfather, wasn't paid by my great-grandfather. These were poll taxes paid by my father, who no longer lives. And he didn't pay for these when he was 20 and 21 and 22. He paid for these when I was a little kid. That's when he paid for these. And so my introduction into getting involved in the community is tied into this, you see, because the poll tax was aimed at trying to prevent people from having the right to vote, or making it more difficult for them to vote. That's what it was aimed at. That's what it was all about. And I learned that very young. At a very young age, I learned what that was about. And then, in my community, when it wasn't about Democrats or Republicans, it was about people. I grew up watching people's rights being suppressed, people's rights being taken away from them. I saw people being intimidated when it came to elections. And it wasn't about Democrats and it wasn't about Republicans. And so the issue that concerns me today isn't about Democrats and it isn't about Republicans. I speak about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what he did to fight for the rights of the people in this country so that we be treated as equal citizens and have the right to vote. He didn't do that for the Democratic Party. It didn't have anything to do with the Democratic Party. It didn't have anything to do with the Republican Party. It didn't have anything to do with any party. It had to do with people's basic fundamental rights. And he is one of my heroes. I grew up in Benavides, Texas, a town of then 1,900 people that was about 99% Hispanic It's now 1,600 people, and my mother still lives there. I live in Laredo. But he fought for our rights. And how appropriate it seems to me that the day that I felt I had to get up and clarify what I am doing and what I will continue to do was a day that a Hispanic woman, because of Dr. King's work, that a Hispanic woman was named to the Supreme Court today because of his work. He stood up for us, not just blacks, not just African Americans, not just Hispanics. No. For poor whites, for everybody. That's what he did, and because of that, today, an African American named Barack Obama appointed a Latina named Sonia Sotomayor to the United States Supreme Court because he stood up, not because it was for Democrats, not because it was for Republicans, because it was for Americans, and so that we would have the rights, all of us, to enjoy the greatness of this country. That's what it was about, and that's why he was my hero, one of them, not the only one, but one of them. I knew who he was, and I learned about him. The first major event I can recall in my life was not John Kennedy being assassinated. I was a little kid, but I don't remember it. I have no memory of it. Many of you do. But I was 8 years old when Dr. King was assassinated, and that I remember. And 8 years after that, I found my way to Memphis, Tennessee, and I found my way to a motel called the Lorraine Motel. I asked my parents, can we go to the Lorraine Motel? They said, what is that? And I found it. And I went there, and it wasn't a fancy museum, Helen, back then. In 1976, it wasn't a fancy museum. It was a rundown motel like it was when Dr. King stayed there and the day that he was assassinated. And I went into the office and I said, could I go up to the room that Dr. King stayed in the night before he died? And the man said, well, okay. He said, it's not really a tourist attraction. I said, well, I'd like to go. So I went up there. My parents said, oh, hurry up, don't take too long. It's not the nicest part of town. Have you ever been there back then? It's nicer now. And I went up there, and he opened the door, and I went inside the room that Dr. King stood in and slept in the last night of his life. And they have a picture, or they did back then, a picture of him in his casket. That's all they had in there, and the room was left exactly the way it was when he last slept there. And I walked out on the balcony, and I looked across at that little window where James Earl Ray shot him from. And I stood there, and I stood on the spot that he died, and I cried. I cried because of what he did. I cried because of who he was and what he stood for. And I cried because of who I am, because that's who I am. And when you see me on the mic, I can't speak for others, but on this issue, members, I don't give a whit about the Democratic Party. I don't give a whit about the Republican Party or any other party. It's not about that for me. And that's why I asked to be recognized on this matter of personal privilege, because I won't ask you to do what I do, and I won't ask you to believe what I believe, and I can't ask you to feel what I feel. But it is important to me because I have always tried to respect every member in this chamber that I have served with. I've tried to respect our differences. I have. And I want you to respect my differences. I would never ask any one of you, not a one of you, to betray the people you believe you represent. Don't ask me to betray mine. Don't ask me to betray my beliefs, because I would never do that to you.